Mervis Diamond Importers brings you the Gabriel Fall Fashion Jewelry event. Discover the latest from Gabriel, New York. Dazzling diamond earrings, spectacular diamond pendants, bracelets, and rings you'll absolutely love. Experience the full Gabriel Diamond Fashion collection. Discover Gabriel engagement and wedding rings paired with the magic of world-famous Mervis diamonds you know and trust. It's the Gabriel Fall Fashion Jewelry Show coming soon, August the 21st through the 23rd at Mervis Diamond Importers. Learn more at mervisdiamond.com or call 800-HER-LOVE.
The wrongs we must right. The fights we must win. The future we must secure together for our nation. This is what's in front of us. This determines what's next for all of us. We are Marines. We were made for this.
Hi there, and welcome again to another episode of the Explaining History podcast. And I want to talk about Canada today. I want to talk particularly about a piece of extraordinary diplomatic kind of, I don't know what you call it actually, diplomatic verbiage that passed between the United States and Canada, which puts me in mind of the rhetoric that passed between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Serbia following the July crisis. I'm going to read some extracts from it in a moment, but the essence of it is that America, in its trade negotiations with Canada, demanded an end to Canadian sovereignty. It demanded the end of essentially Canada as a self-organizing nation state, and demanded that Canada's economic and foreign policy and other aspects of domestic policy essentially be ceded to Washington. The extreme, I don't even you can call it extreme, sort of unprecedented demands raise far more questions than for which there are answers to. Unfortunately, I like trying to do it the other way round here. I like to try to present questions for which we potentially do have answers, normally about things happening in the past. But this is quite unbelievable. In a time in which the word unbelievable really perhaps gets overused with good reason, this is quite extraordinary. And when Trump talked about turning Canada into the 51st state of America, this is an open demand for Canada to consent to that without the need for America putting troops on the ground. So let's get into it. Okay, so firstly, the historical analogy. The Austro-Hungarians wanted to create a case for war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo had almost given them this. They needed to create a case for war that would be accepted by Germany. And the reason for that is that the reason for needing this, desiring a case for war instead of a kind of a huge concessions on their terms, was that they had looked at the rise of Serbia with alarm. Serbia is a very difficult neighbour, a very kind of expansionist nationalist power that was an awful lot of trouble. But then again, Austria had annexed parts of the Balkans, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the Serbs were none too happy about that. The Austrians and the Austro-Hungarians looked, but primarily the Habsburgs, looked upon the rising power of Serbia, backed by Russia, and thought, if we had the opportunity, we really need to smash the Serbs. We need to absolutely break their power, and in a gruesome way, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand has provided us with that. They present the Serbs with a list of demands that are almost guaranteed to be unacceptable. Now, this is my first question about the American demands to Canada. Is the point that they're unacceptable? I think probably not. In the case of the Austro-Hungarians, they present the Serbs with a series of demands, and the Serbs agreed to most of them. But what they don't agree to is the diminution of Serbian sovereignty. They say basically Austrian policemen cannot set foot on Serbian soil to carry out the investigation into the assassination, to arrest whoever they feel like arresting, and to conduct whatever additional inquiries they feel like inquiring. This is a sort of a kind of invasion by stealth, and so the Serbs reject the demands, and you get to the first stage of the July crisis, the war beginning between Serbia and Austria, which then draws in Russia, and Russia's entry draws in Germany, and then Germany invades France, and away we go. So the demands that the Trump regime have made over Canada, again, jaw-dropping. Now, some of the claims have been are as yet unverified, so this actually potentially might become more extreme over time as certain demands are firmed up. But the ones we actually do know, and the biggest one, is that America has asked that, or demanded, that Canada restrict its ability to make other trade agreements. A provision limiting Canada's ability to negotiate with other countries would essentially prevent Canada from diversifying its trade beyond the United States. It is America essentially coming to Canada and saying, would you please like to become economically dependent on the USA, more so than you already are? There are other rules around auto tariffs and rules of origin. The car industry is deeply integrated across the US border, and the change in tariff schedules and regimes will affect, assembly plants and part suppliers and investment on both sides. But it's mainly meant to massively disadvantage the Canadian side in favour of US automakers. The decision, again, I'm not sure that Trump is aware that a huge part of Canada is French speaking in Quebec, and that the French speaking population has been there since the 7 Years' War, and earlier. Quite why Trump took the decision to attack French language and cultural rights in Quebec is unknown, but I suppose it's wrapped up in larger kind of paranoias about sort of DEI or minority rights or whatever kind of sort of incoherent nonsense is spewed from the extreme right, and that this is, again, a strange and eccentric choice, hardly a pressure point, because there is no way a Canadian Prime Minister is ever going to consent to the downgrading of Quebec, French Quebec, Quebecois cultural and linguistic rights. And critical minerals. The issue here is about, obviously, America wants exclusivity in terms of access to critical minerals, which would prevent actually Canadian companies from accessing them. It would certainly, the point is to prevent Chinese companies from accessing them, but it's also to prevent a Canadian tech industry from emerging. The placing pressure on the Canadian agricultural market, and this would involve giving.
You know that thing that you love? You'll find others geeking out about it on Facebook. Whether you're looking for community or inspiration, Facebook helps turn passion into action. Obsessed with running a marathon? Discover a neighborhood run club group. Start training and meet your new neighbor. Thinking about cooking more at home? Connect with meal prep groups to discover recipes in a new community. And as you're scrolling the feed, you may even find reels showing you top running shoes or the best tools for your culinary journey. This summer, find more on Facebook.
The biggest homeowner mistakes. Do-it-yourself lumberjack. Better leave it to the pros. Doing your own electrical work. The results could be shocking. But letting just anyone replace your windows? Biggest mistake ever. Be a happy homeowner and leave your window replacement to Renewal by Andersen. For a limited time, buy one window or door and get the second 40% off. Plus $200 off your entire purchase with a minimum of 4 and special financing. Visit renewalbyandersenhome.com today.
Vrbo makes it easy to claim your dream summer spot with early booking deals. From homes with pools to poolside loungers. When you book a Vrbo, you don't have to reserve any loungers. They're all yours. All you have to do is book early. Book with Vrbo.
American agri-producers and food producers unlimited access to US, to Canadian Canadian markets. So, all of these things are, it seems designed to create a rejection. And perhaps, I'm not sure what the clever grand strategy here is, as Trump is approaching the midterms, already highly unpopular. And all this can do, surely, is create further tariffs on American goods and further tariffs on American imports. Now, there are times when you get trade agreements, global trade agreements like TTIP and things like this, where the whole point of them is to kind of, objectively, I say objectively, to harmonise trade rules and to make trade and investment easier, so that if an American company knows it's going to be operating on a level playing field to the likes it knows about in or experiences in America, in say Europe or Southeast Asia, then they're more likely to go ahead with that. But practically what that means is the most powerful person in the room, the US, tends to set out the rules of trade that generally they prefer and that benefits them. And why do European countries go along with this? Well, having access to a US market or a wider access to a US market is always nice. And part of what Trump has always sought to do is to say, this is a zero-sum game. We win, you lose. And that's how he's conducted trade agreements. And it works to an extent in that you have a particularly craven generation of European leaders who will take any kind of abasement and humiliation from Trump and kind of crawl on their knees in order to not provoke him further. I mean, Europe's actually got far more clout economically than Canada has on its own. Carney has calculated correctly that there's a great deal of electoral potential in standing up to Trump because most Canadians hate him. But the other thing that things like TTIP were always good for was making sure that in the interests of trade and growth and all the other kind of fairly shaky indicators of economic prosperity that we're constantly being bombarded with, which are nice indicators if you're already doing well from the situation, but pretty meaningless if you're not. What it guaranteed was a further global erosion, mainly of workers' rights, consumer protections as well, environmental protections, but mainly workers' rights, and secret dispute resolution boards, which is secret meetings of lawyers, which were entirely unaccountable. These are all dreamed up by neoliberal think tanks around the world. That trade and investment dispute resolution boards were there really to agree in favour of corporate power when it came down to local gripes about the workings of the global system. And this again, this was part of the great fantasy of the interwar or the post-war neoliberals, who thought that local problems such as trade unions in first world countries and national liberation and national sovereignty movements in global south countries, these were the big problems that needed to be ironed out. And by the early 20th century,
you've got social dialed in. Search is doing its thing. So why do your marketing results look the same as 6 months ago? That's because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else. Podcast listeners are a different audience entirely. More engaged, harder to reach through traditional channels, and ready to act when someone they trust makes a recommendation. We're Acast, and we put them right in front of you. Browse thousands of the world's leading podcasts, book host reads or run your own ads, and track every conversion in real time. Same skills you already have, brand new results. Acast. Acast.com/advertise.
The ironing process is in full swing. But things like TTIP were mutual agreements between ruling elites in North America, Europe, and other parts of the world. This is not. This is Trump, I think, perhaps fundamentally misunderstanding the techniques that a liberal elite were very keen on using, and understanding why they were so powerful and effective. as a kind of, no, I don't think a nativist himself. I don't think he believes in anything, but somebody that uses nativism as a vehicle, white working class nationalism in America, as a vehicle for and for kind of articulating grievance and capturing grievance. He has essentially said, well, the likes of the Hillary Clintons and the EUs of the world have benefited from this setup at the expense of, the American working class, which is indeed true, but far more so at the expense of other groups of workers around the world, from Mexico to Indonesia and other such places. And he said, instead, what I will do is you've seen me on The Apprentice, I fire people and shout at them and things like that. So I'll be really good. I'll walk into these trade meetings and I'll say, we'll be taking the best, the lion's share of the booty for American workers. And this is the version of things he's trying to impose on Carney. Of course, it's completely stupid, and negotiations don't work like that. And he probably knows that. I mean, part of his kind of mythology has always been that he's the guy, he's the sort of like the smartest and most belligerent guy in the room, and he operates like a crook and everybody knows it, but he's kind of a sort of in sort of like kind of almost capitalist folklore, an admirable crook, the sort of crook for whom one aspires to be able to be the biggest man in the room that can shake down and square down the banks that are asking for their money back. Well, in this instance, all we have is the kind of the fantasy laid bare, that you get somebody like Trump and insert him into a world system of trades and understandings and diplomacy that has emerged over several centuries, and all of a sudden he actually doesn't know what to do. And I think that this is demonstration of that. I mean, the extent to which all of this comes from Trump anyway is an interesting one to entertain, and perhaps it all doesn't. But I can't understand the purpose in an election year of antagonizing Canada. Most Americans just aren't anti-Canadian enough for that to work, but they do care about their living standards, and they do wonder what a president who is attacking the nearest neighbour might be trying to achieve. All of this comes in the same 48 hours when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced yet another attempt to lay economic siege to Iran. This is again a curious case of illogic, a regime that has painted itself into a historical corner, desperate to try to get out of it. So this is something that America has tried to do to China twice, and has failed. Now, if you want to cut Iran off from all global trade, you have to cut it off from one of its biggest trading partners, which is China. And you have to hope that China will play ball and consent to this, whilst it would be wildly against Chinese interests. And you have to also not have tried to economically destroy China at least twice in the preceding 10 years. And so the combination of that and a series of diktats to Canada, whilst we're aware of these things happening fairly consistently, there seems to be kind of compression here, that the timescale seems to be squeezed, that these sorts of random acts of diplomacy or random acts of anti-diplomacy begin to sort of look like kind of the flailings of a desperate regime. Sort of, we'll just try stuff. Again, how much of this is coming directly from Trump and how much of this is being done by his minions is unclear, at least to me at the moment. But I suspect that what Trump has created is similar. Obviously all Nazi comparisons are banal, but the kind of the Kershaw working towards the Führer model had this notion that Hitler is this quite inattentive, idle kind of figure who doesn't read anything, certainly doesn't sign anything, and most information is conveyed informally. And that, in order to get Hitler's favour, you have to be close to him. You have to be at the Berghof, and various Nazi functionaries would have set up kind of houses at Berchtesgaden down the hill, and have functionaries and adjutants living there for considerable periods of time, in the hope that they would at some point be summoned up to the Berghof to tell Hitler their ministry, their kind of patron's great idea. And Hitler would he would limit access to himself so that people would have to come and sort of almost prostrate themselves in front of him. And he would go, his secretary, Heinz Heinrich Lammers, would intercept them and be able to say to these kind of various flunkies and minions looking to get support for their various initiatives or power grabs, what do you want to tell the Führer? And then he would go in and say, Führer, Goering has suggested this, that, or the other, or Robert Ley has suggested this, that, or the other, and Hitler would sometimes even just grunt again, yeah, and sort of indicate he approved or disapproved, and Lammers would then have to kind of translate this and come back to them and say, well, yeah, he says it's a goer, and Hitler would sometimes set up rival ministries to sort of counteract one another, so that he never got a powerful figure who could undermine him. I think Trump's a sort of like an even more banal version of this, in that not that he's planning kind of some kind of fascistic vision of the future. I think people like Stephen Miller are, but he's a celebrity con man that would like to spend his days cheating at golf. He's lazy and inattentive. He's the typical kind of blowhard moron that imagines that all of this stuff is kind of easy anyway, and when it turns out not to be, it becomes angry and restless and discontent and frustrated and has tantrums. And so I suspect the reason why you get this kind of mass incoherence and wild policy gyrations is it sort of depends what day you get him, and it depends who has access to him, and it depends how that access is mediated, and it depends what it is they think they've heard from him about what it is he does or doesn't want. And that all changes day by day, which is why America will be so immensely diminished at the end of all of this and won't be trusted for a long, long time. Why the damage that Iran can inflict on America simply grows, because all you have to do is be patient and let Trump do the rest. But there you go. Those are my thoughts for the day, and I'll be diving into something a bit more concrete tomorrow. Probably we're going to be looking at some perspectives on the draft in the 1960s. But who knows? I'm very changeable. Take care, folks. All the best. Bye-bye.
More people, more devices, more AI. The way we live today takes a lot of energy. Wind and solar are powerful, but not always available. That's where natural gas comes in, with reliable energy whenever it's needed. Companies like Energy Transfer work behind the scenes, safely transporting these resources to facilities across the country through a network of underground pipelines. Learn more at ittakesenergy.com.
You've never been one to settle. Stand down or stand still. You're a lifelong learner, energized by excellence. There's a fire inside you you can't ignore. You've got competition to outrun, momentum to build on, and your own high standards to meet. Stop now? Not a chance. At Capella University, we help you catch what you're chasing because you've always had the drive. Now, go earn the degree. Capella University. What can't you do? Visit capella.edu to learn more.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.